Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me okay? There's a little bit of a delay, so I'm just going to talk for a second until I start seeing the comments come up that you can, in fact, hear me and that I'm not just talking to myself. I'm Mishalla with OM Systems, and you guys know me from YouTube and probably a few other stores around the country that you might have hung out with me at. I have said hello to a lot of you, especially some of the people from the greater Denver area. And I know Richard's in here too, from Minnesota. Welcome tonight, afternoon, wherever it is where you are. I'm not really sure. It's pretty much all Americans in here tonight, so it's either afternoon or evening for you guys, so welcome. Okay, good, we can hear me. That is the first step in a live stream, is making sure the audio works, right? So this afternoon, we're going to be talking about the all-new revamped 100 to 400 millimeter Mark II. Of course, there's a whole bunch of neat little features that got added to it to make it an even better iteration of the original lens. So we're really excited to talk about that. And I will drop a link to it in the chat for you. We're really excited because it's going to be shipping at the end of the month. So if you're waiting to get your hands on that, it is going to be in stores very soon. But first and foremost, I would love to introduce OM System Ambassador Art Lefo. What's up, Art?
Hey, Mishalla. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, there's like people from everywhere tonight, all over the country. We got Eastern
Tasmania.
Pennsylvania.
Good morning. Wow.
Ooh, the Australians have joined us. Hello. How early is it in Australia right now? I feel like it's quite early.
Like 7, 6,
yeah.
7.
I don't figure we're going to get any of the Europeans, but we'll get the Australians. Thank you, Australia, for watching us tonight. So Art Lefo, you're one of our OM System ambassadors. Can you tell the group who doesn't know you a little about yourself before we jump into this?
Yeah, totally. So again, my name is Arthur. I go by Art. And I've been an OM System ambassador since 2021. I've been a professional photographer since 2018 or so. I am a wildlife guide as well. I lead photography trips around the world throughout the year, and I focus my summers in Alaska, where I spend 3.5 months with brown bears in Lake Clark National Park. So bears are my specialty animal, so to say. That being said, I've lived in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I currently live in Colorado, probably moving back to Jackson Hole soon, but I've spent a lot of time with a lot of incredible animals: moose, elk, great gray owls, black bears, wolves, coyotes. I mean, you name it, all the North American megafauna. I tend to specialize on high latitude megafauna, so northbound animals generally. I grew up in Miami, Florida, where I somehow just seem to escape that whole ecosystem. I have a lot of love for it, and I do visit several times a year, but my heart is with the cold northern latitudes these days. And yeah, I had an amazing time, shooting with this new lens on the OM1 Mark II. And I've used a lot of other OM lenses I'm happy to talk about, when we get to the Q&A, that I can compare this lens to as well, which, gives me some a good point of view to be able to assess where this lens fits into OM's lineup and kind of the value it brings. And overall, I loved it.
Good. I'm glad. So not out photographing gators then in Florida?
No. We used to go on hikes and, wander around swamps in the winter when the gators get really lethargic because they can't move much when it's cold, and, watch them from closer than we probably should. We were stupid and young. But that's a different lifetime ago, it feels like.
I went to Florida twice and saw gators, and I was like, absolutely not. There's no need for me to ever be this close to an alligator ever again. I'm good. But I did photograph some amazing birds down there. So I'm there for the birds there. They have very beautiful, large birds.
I mean, owls, wonderful owls down in Florida.
Yeah. So I'm going to pop up your slides just so we can start kind of looking through some of your photos. They've been very amazing. These were some actually been already featured on our website. I'm very excited about some of these images. But first, here's the weather showing off our weather ceiling. I guess that's Tiffany, right? Is that Tiffany?
That's Tiffany. Tiffany Taxis, another one of our amazing ambassadors. She's one of my close friends, along with Brooke Little Bear, Brooke Bartleson, who many of you probably know as well. Yeah, we have a little too much fun when we're together, and there were a lot of giggles had during this photo shoot. Weatherproofing wise, this camera holds up, to everything I've ever used from OM. We were laying this camera in the snow. The lens, we got some rain, we got some snow. Tiffany dropped it in the mud a couple times,
Like you do.
Yep, just to make sure it does what it's supposed to, right? And honestly, it held up great, just like everything else I've ever used from OM. So it's really nice to see a lens come in at this price point where you could actually treat it, like a pro level lens and put it through the ringer, so to say. It was cold most of the time. We had temperatures down to minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I think, on this trip that we took all these photos on. So it did get quite chilly. I will say using this lens with gloves is nice because it's metal. There's no rubberized components on the lens, unlike, say, the 150-400, which has a rubber dial. So gloves are nice when it gets really cold. But aside from that, it held up to the temperatures really well and performed well, as you guys will see from the images that are to follow.
And you guys spent like a couple days down there in the Rocky Mountains, kind of hiking around. Were you in like particularly hunting for, or not hunting, I hate to use that word, scoping out a specific animal, or were you just hoping for anything?
Yeah, so the way this project played out is I used this lens for a couple weeks on my own. I actually brought it out to France, where my family's from. I was born in France, so I shot with it in Normandy, not too far from the UK. I saw someone in here was from the UK, and was having fun with herons and shorebirds and stuff like that. I didn't include any of those photos just because they're not my typical photos that I publish, but got up to speed with it on the shores of Normandy out there. And then when Tiffany came down to Colorado, we were kind of just looking for anything and everything. So we spent some time in the greater Denver area, even in some of the state parks where, people might have access or not have access to really wild areas. We wanted to be able to showcase the fact that you can get amazing images with this camera in an urban area of wildlife. And then we also ventured into the mountains and went on some pretty tiresome adventures looking for critters in deep snow and frigid temperatures. So we kind of covered a lot of different bases with this camera, which was cool to do. Normally, we have a week or something in Yellowstone, as we've done in the past with some of our other releases, and we use the gear then. But both of us really got to use this lens in a variety of conditions, including Tiffany later in the month. She went up to Yellowstone and got some pretty amazing images with it as well. So it was overall just a really fun experience to be able to explore different places and environments where we can find all sorts of wildlife, birds to, really big animals like moose.
All right. Well, let's look at an animal then. I'll stop asking silly questions.
No worries. So this is a photo I chose first for a few reasons. This was one of the photos I got when I was alone before Tiffany came up, before all the snow fell. And for those of you who don't know, in Colorado, we have probably the largest density of elk in the world. A lot of elk. And in the winter, these elk come down from the high alpine and they start spreading around in areas closer to the foothills. Of course, many of you may have been to Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park, where they literally just hang out in the town starting in the fall. And but around Denver, these elk can be a little bit harder to find sometimes. They cover a little more ground in the foothills, and I really wanted to find an elk, regardless of whether it was a big bull or a young one like this one or a cow even, and kind of use it on what had been a really overcast week, right? So the light was really challenging. This was taken around 11 a.m. So the light in theory should be really good, but it was quite dark here. I should have put the ISO in here, but I was pumping the ISO up pretty high here, probably around 4,000, in order to salvage a 1/320th of a second shutter speed. And I was amazed with this new lens, the Mark II of the 1-400, just how much I was able to get off in terms of image stabilization. So naturally, I'm walking around in the woods, right? It took me about 2-3 hours to find this herd of elk, and then maybe another hour to have them not look at me like I was a threat, of just kind of sitting a good distance away and watching them. And as you can tell from this photo, even when I managed to get a little bit closer, they were still curious. This young bull kind of peered through the trees right over a hill that was just above me. The light was not great. I did my best with my shutter speed and ISO balance and still managed to get a shot that I was really happy with, both in terms of how it comes out in terms of the light and the detail, but also in terms of, how much softness there is in the image. A lot of foreground bokeh, the tree on the right, and then the tree that this young elk was standing closer to, all kind of just framed this image nicely. And this was, I think, the first image I took on this lens that I was happy with. So it was really portable. It was easy to walk around as I looked for these elk. It wasn't a pain, to stand there with my OM1 Mark II and the 1-400 Mark II as I waited for these elk to, feel a little more comfortable. And then when the moment came up, I was able to, quickly fire off the shot. This was a split second. This elk, I think, walked off to the right just a few moments later. So I managed to get a burst of images. This was one of the ones where everything kind of just lined up the way I liked it. Right. That kind of suited me. And I was like, wow, okay, this tiny little lens is pretty fun. And for the price point, it's clearly capable of producing some images that I myself am happy with, and happy to dive into a few more here.
Yeah, no, I definitely can't wait to share some more of your images. You've got some really beautiful things in here, but I'm just impressed with that last image, how dark it is before the snow. And I love the progression of now we have a little bit of snow.
Mm-hmm. I do see a question in the chat. I just want to point out from that last image, the elk was shot at f/6.3. The millimeters you see here are not converted to the 35 millimeter equivalent focal range. So 400 is the max focal range on that last image. And so 6.3 is the lowest aperture at 400 millimeters. Right. When you're shooting at 100, it's an f5. So this image, this moose, beautiful bull moose, shot in the San Juan Mountains in southwest Colorado, about 7 hours or so from Denver. So this was one of the adventures we went on. And I really wanted to find some moose. Having lived in Jackson Hole, I'm really familiar with the moose in that area. Colorado does not have as abundant and as dense of a moose population, so they can be a little bit more finicky to find, especially in the winter. And we were seeing an abnormally high amount of snowfall early this winter. I remember I was down in the same region 2 months prior to when I took this image, and they got something like 3 feet of snow in 2 days. And it was like the end of October 18th, and it looked like midwinter. The mountains were just totally covered. So all the wildlife kind of ended up in different areas than they normally would, right? Moose are looking for typically shallower snow areas, not too deep, where they can still access some vegetation, and where the willows, as you can see in this image, the beautiful orange tinted bushes here, are still accessible. Willows are one of the main parts of their diet in the winter. They eat the twigs, actually. The name moose comes from the native term mooswa, which means twig eater. And so I was looking for these moose in the twigs. That being said, the snow was deep. I had some snowshoes that weren't great. I was still sinking up to my thighs. And took several hours to find a moose, but I knew, you know, there was a water source, there was a lot of food options for them, and this was an area that I had seen a moose a couple days prior. So I was like, it's just a matter of time. Carried around this lens the entire time, kind of slinged around my back, trudging through the deep snow, and I was able to cover quite a bit of ground, several miles before I ended up finding this moose, and really never felt dragged down by the weight of my equipment, which is personally one of the main reasons why I shoot OM system is the portability and of course the versatility and quality of the images itself. But that being said, after a couple hours of walking around, we found this moose kind of in the distance, approached it. He hadn't been around humans probably for a couple weeks or months even, just because of how remote the area he was in was. And so he was a little surprised, I think, to see us there, as you could tell by this photo. He ended up allowing us to get a bit closer, which the next image will show you is a bit closer up. But what I really appreciated about, you know, the lens in the case of the creation of this image and the next one is just how portable this lens is. Some of you may have shot with the 150 to 400 before or not. I think this lens is a fantastic alternative to that, especially if you're getting started in wildlife photography or don't have the funds to shell out, you know, all that money on a big expensive lens. But that being said, you know, this lens was so much smaller than that white lens, and my balance as I was walking through the snow was not compromised in any way, whereas I've kind of wobbled a bit sometimes carrying a bigger lens, you know. So there was an advantage here, you know, even for a lens that's theoretically at a lower price point. You know, I was really glad I had it and nothing bigger. You know, it's about the same size as the 40 to 150, which is another one of my favorite lenses, the 40 to 150 f2.8. But in that same size package, I was able to get the reach to get an image like this one, which was shot slightly wider, 321, so 642 millimeter equivalent. But still having that range in such a compact package is kind of mind-boggling. I had used the original one a few times before I ended up getting, you know, a series of the higher end lenses. But I always felt like that one was a bit lacking in terms of sharpness. And this one was producing images that I'm pretty stoked on, you know. Overall, just really great high quality lens that I was able to take on some pretty rugged adventures. So this moose kind of kept grazing on his, or munching on his twigs. And eventually we didn't want to put any more pressure on him. He was aware of us and, you know, didn't seem necessarily uneasy, but I was like, you know what, we got a few beautiful images, shared about a half hour with him. And I'm happy to let him go on his merry way and, you know, do moose things.
I love his snow beard.
Yeah. Oh, they're awesome animals. Very attentive and very curious animals to be around. I mean, most of you probably know they can be quite dangerous as well. So really important to respect these animals at all times, because a lot less predictable than, say, bears. I'd say bears are very predictable, spending so much time with them. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any bear images. They're all tucked away in their den. Yeah,
I feel bad. This project being in the middle of winter, we had limited wildlife opportunities.
But yeah, so overall, was very pleased with the portability of this lens for this particular adventure that we were on.
So a couple quick questions and we'll go on to the some more of your photos. But Richard is asking, do you use the animal AI autofocus when you photograph moose?
I toggle moose in specific. They tend not to move as much. Personally, I trust myself the most, and I trust my focus on any camera that I've ever used the most when I'm the one setting the point. When I have the option and it's an animal like a moose, like he probably sat in this position for 20 seconds. So I have my little lever, you know, mapped on the back where you can switch it between single and continuous autofocus. And
Mhm.
I have my AEL, I think it is, the button in the middle of that little lever, mapped to turn on and off animal focus. So I can quickly
So
switch from
smart.
continuous autofocus with animal AI and flip the switch, hit the button, and suddenly it's single autofocus, single point. So for this image, I used single point, just because, again, when there's bushes in the way, you get some shots, you miss some sometimes with animal AI, depending on the bushes and the animal. Moose are very dark animals. So I've found that of all the animals I photograph, from bears to moose to birds, of course, I think moose are probably the most challenging in terms of the AI actually detecting the animal, because their eyes are really dark. Here you can actually see the white in the eyes of the moose a bit, but normally you can't. So it almost looks like a blob with branches. You know what I mean? So I think it kind of confuses it. So single auto point, single focus, with the smallest point on the OM1 Mark II was how I captured this image, and came out really sharp.
All right. Next up, David is asking, do you ever use the 2x teleconverter that's built into the camera? Or did you guys take the actual teleconverters when you were out on this trip at all? The physical ones? Or
We had access to a 2x, but we never needed it.
yeah.
There's an image, for those, to answer David, I never used the digital 2x. I will use the actual teleconverter sometimes. The 1.4 and the 2. I love the 1.4, big fan of it. I used that one recently for a mountain lion image that I actually put the 1.4 on the 150-400, the big white lens, rather than using the built-in teleconverter. And I'm glad I did, because this mountain lion was 200 yards away. If you guys are curious about the image, my Instagram is Art Lefo, and that image is up there, one of the recent ones. And teleconverters, I think, are a great option. In using this lens, we never came across an animal that was so far that we couldn't reach it with the 800 millimeters. I mean, the 800 was more than enough for everything we found. And we did crop a few of these images. I see Cheryl was asking that. But no, none of these are heavily cropped. There may be, I don't know, I've probably cropped out a third of the image on this one, for example.
More for artistic choice versus needing to crop in. Yeah, I would say David, also, just to answer that question in a vague stance, I generally always recommend, if you can and you're able, use a teleconverter, a physical teleconverter, either the 1.4, which also my favorite, it pairs wonderfully with the 40-150 2.8, such a beautiful combo. But just remembering, a 2x digital crop, well, it's super awesome if you have nothing else available to you, use it, love it. But you can always crop in, but you can't undo what you didn't shoot. So that is the digital crop. It's zooming in on your image, so you're going to lose part of your image. So I would rather shoot it without it and crop in where you need. That's just my unwarranted opinion on that matter. But yeah, you should get the 2x teleconverter, David. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah, because then you're preserving your image, or your resolution, right? All 21 megapixels. But you're also getting that extra zoom factor. And the 2x is a pretty useful tool to have in your repertoire, especially when you're talking about really distant animals. I'm looking forward to using that in a couple weeks. Brooke and I will be leading a trip in the Himalayas, looking for snow leopards and brown bears. And snow leopards, obviously, you don't see very close very often. So we'll be using as much range as we can humanly get, including the 2x teleconverter.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Should we look at another image and then we'll start stacking up questions again here? So gorgeous.
Thank you. A lot of OM shooters are birders. So naturally I wanted to try and get some birds. And my favorite two species of birds are bald eagles, specifically juvenile bald eagles. I think just have so much character to them, because they have all these, spotted patterns dashed with white and black, and they just look so unique. And then great gray owls are probably tied for my favorite bird along with these bald eagles. But in the Denver area, this was actually shot within the city limits. Technically not Denver, technically Lakewood, but in the metropolitan area. So we have quite a few eagles that winter in the Denver area because a lot of our lakes around here don't freeze. And so these eagles have the opportunity to fish year round around these lakes. So I had done some scouting before Tiffany showed up. This was one of those really cold mornings where some of the photos that are up on the website were taken, and we literally had to stop shooting to put our hands back in our pockets because they were getting so cold after 5 minutes shooting. Not even, you would feel the cold seep through your fingers. I think it was -10 or something. You would love that, Mishalla.
No, I know that everyone knows how much I hate being cold, and it is now like this global joke about how much I hate being cold.
So it was cold. It was very cold. But it was a beautiful day. The light was great. And then we had about 8 to 10 eagles that were circling this big lake looking for fish. What I really loved about the lens during this shoot was just the range, right? The range, the autofocus speed, which is noticeably improved compared to the Mark I, and being able to track everything from 200 to 800 millimeters of focal range, track a bird as it's flying closer and past you. I had a blast. It's so light, it's easy to hold with your hand and stabilize as you're panning and shooting the birds. So we had a great time. Tiffany and I both here. She got some amazing shots of these birds as well, which some of them on the website. I don't know if any of these are on the website, but some might be hers, some might be mine. These two I think I included are mine. But overall, just a really, really awesome experience shooting with this lens. The autofocus is fast. Is it as fast as a prime lens? Naturally, it's not going to be as fast as a prime lens, but it is more than fast enough to get a handful of great images out of a single burst of a bird flying by, assuming that you have it in frame. I was using bird autofocus on this, and the bird autofocus on OM rarely lets me down. That is, I think, where autofocus AI shines the most of all animals. And dogs. So if you like coyotes and wolves and foxes, it nails those too. But anything that it's actually fully designed to capture works flawlessly. And then it works really great on other animals, like bears, which resemble dogs somewhat.
Right.
But
works on deer pretty well too.
Yeah. So I think it depends, as long as they're not really dark. I think that's the one, like I said earlier, the one caveat that I've kind of run into. But shooting higher shutter speeds here to 1/2500, fully zoomed in. This was also cropped because this eagle was quite far. I think this was actually a pretty heavy crop on this image. But that just goes to show you the detail and the quality of the image coming out of this camera and from this lens. This is most likely a quarter to a third of the original image. So the majority of the image is cropped out. I just really love the way this eagle was kind of soaring in line with that shadow on the mountain in the backdrop. And a beautiful eagle that somewhat, blends into his surroundings almost with his pattern, yet still has enough of that softness in the bokeh with the lens at 6.3 to have enough of that pop, right? So I was really happy with this image. I actually just posted it on my Instagram, I think yesterday or the day before, and just had a ton of fun shooting with this lens when it comes to birds.
Yeah, I do know that was the first thing I noticed when we were going through all your images you submitted for your project. I was like, the bird looks like the background. It literally looks like it's mimicking nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's so insane how identical the pattern is. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you have another.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, you.
I was just going to say I also had a lot of fun using this lens for any Europeans that are listening in. on the shores of Normandy. That's where I started using it. Like I said, there weren't any mammals out there that I photographed. It was all shorebirds. And honestly, I took photos of gulls, a variety of different gulls, and herons and tiny little shorebirds and stuff like that. And had a blast. Low light again, really foggy in Normandy, typically in the winter. And autofocus did what it had to do. When it comes to birds and the speed of the autofocus on this lens, it nailed it.
Yeah, I'm all about the bird AF. That really changed. I tried for years to be a bird photographer, and I was terrible at it, especially birds in flight. And now I have birds in flight photos. And I'm like, oh, I'm cheating, but I don't care. I'm so happy, and my images are so much better now.
We've all effectively become significantly better photographers over the last 5 years. Thanks to all
I know. I'm like, wow, I'm so talented. Thank you, OM System. So this one I think is my favorite out of your whole set that you shot. I love this one. That sky's gorgeous.
I really like it. This was, again, lower light. I think I shot this one higher ISO. And well, I know I did because it was sunset, but maybe the same eagle. I'm not sure. I didn't look at it closely enough, but there was quite a few of them, so could easily be another one. But this bird, we kind of had birds flying overhead to our side. Sometimes they would perch. Sometimes they would dive down or, chase each other around. But the hardest thing where we were was being ready for the bird, because you're on this peninsula that juts out into the middle of this really big lake. And you have some eagles on the outside, and you have some eagles that fly around the bays that are technically behind you. And sometimes they cross over and go every which way. It was quite windy that day, so they were soaring around quite a bit. And so we had to be really adaptable when it comes to, oh crap, there's a bird coming right now. Like, you turn around and the eagle's flying right at you, and you fumble quickly to zoom out and get the bird in frame and all that. Which was, again, made quite a bit easier just by the compactness of this lens, and having that such a great focal range down to 200 really helped, even as birds, got a little bit closer. I don't think I got anything that I was super proud of at really close range when they flew by. Things really have to line up well, but this was one of my favorites just because the clouds in the background were well lit up. Some color coming through with some dark stormy clouds as well. And again, a beautiful juvenile bald eagle that actually, I mean, if you had the ability, I don't know how big the screen is for most of you, this eagle was actually mid blink when I captured this image. So his eye has his nictating membrane over it. It's kind of like a teal blue eye, because just coincidentally, he was blinking when I snapped this image. And it was the moment where he lined up in the pretty clouds on the backdrop. So overall, once again, I mean, just how quickly you can adapt to different scenarios with such a compact package and still have it produce, beautiful images was a real treat to use when photographing eagles that were seemingly coming from every direction throughout that afternoon.
I was trying to get it zoomed way in and brought up, but I couldn't do it fast enough. Okay, I think I can do this. You guys are going to look at this in the weirdest possible way because I'm going to show a second screen, but he's not wrong. It's very cool. We're looking at it in a PDF because that's what I've got right now, but
it's funny.
Let me zoom in as far as I can because that's just insane. You can totally see that eye. That's awesome.
Yeah,
so
mid-blank. Cool. Almost looks like a robot.
Oh, so cool. Okay, sorry. Back to your slides. I just wanted to share that because you were not wrong. It looks amazing.
But yeah, so for birds, this performed really well. I had zero complaints. I wish I had the opportunity to get them on some other of my favorite birds, like great gray owls, where you're, also capturing images in low light environments, but I had some other low light opportunities that I was happy to include. And the eagles delivered. I mean, these are some of my best eagle in flight shots I've gotten. All thanks to this great new lens.
I can't believe you were just in the city limits and there were all these eagles there.
Oh, yeah. It
I
wasn't
guess
like a peaceful environment, like you could hear the highway probably 600 yards away. And I mean, this is urban wildlife photography without a doubt. But, when you have such a long range, you can fit your subject into a background that doesn't look like you're in the city. The first image is a great example, right? Because a lot of the times he's flying in front of what are homes or neighborhoods or this or that. But as it flies in front of the mountains or above behind these beautiful clouds or in front of these beautiful clouds, you can kind of crop in enough that you kind of lose track of where you are.
Right. When I think it's also like a really good reminder, I guess I live in a city too, and I don't think about that, but I live in an area that has a lot of hawks because of the farms that are near and around. And I think, just kind of going out and finding your local body of water in the right, like migration season or spring season when the babies are coming out and things like that. Like you can find all of this stuff without having to trek out into the wilderness. You really can still get to experience wildlife, even if you don't live in such a far out situation. Although Colorado is obviously a little bit more nature based than some cities are. Yeah. I mean, you got some beautiful pigeons in New York, right?
You
do. With the right amount of zoom and bokeh.
I have nothing appreciation for pigeons.
All right. So quickly asking a question and then we'll go into the next ones and we'll talk about the Sync IS and all that. But David just wanted to know, and to clarify, are you using the bird AI for mammals or are you using the cat and dog AI for mammals?
I typically default to cat and dog for mammals. I have, however, run into scenarios where there's one in particular that stands out that was just astounding. We were photographing an ermine in Yellowstone. There's actually a film that we made with Petapixel last winter that's on YouTube. If you just search Petapixel, OM System, Arthur, Tiffany, it should come up. It's 15 minutes. It was for the release of the OM1 Mark II. And we got a pretty amazing ermine encounter where I was using the cat and dog AI and Tiffany was using the bird AI. And she was like, the bird AI is nailing it. And I was like, what? So I switched the bird AI and it really did nail. And I think maybe it's because it was such a tiny, weaselly little creature that moved so fast. I don't know. But to answer your question, most of the time, when it comes to bears, definitely coyotes. I mean, coyotes, foxes, and wolves, hands down, those are dogs, canids.
Yep.
It thinks it's a dog. I mean, my dog that's in the other room looks more like a coyote than a dog. So definitely use that dog and cat for anything that I think is mammal-like. And then also just keep in mind as you're using these AI features, when it comes to your environment and bushes or how much your subject might stand out or not from the backdrop, keep those things in mind. If you start seeing something, maybe like it's not focusing like it normally does or something like that, stay flexible, which is why I have that AEL button on the back of my camera program to turn on and off AI autofocus. So it'll just turn it on and off to whatever your default is. If you have a default set to cat and dog, then when you turn it on and off, it's going to cat and dog. But if you actually want to switch to bird, you have to go into the menu or whatnot. So I have it in my menu.
Are you on the Mark I or the Mark II?
Mark II.
So if you assign that to a button, all you have to do is hold the button down and roll the front dial, and it will switch between them. It'll switch between bird.
The more you know.
Yeah. See, look, we're all learning something today. Yeah, no, if you.
I had no idea. You just saved me time.
Yeah, because I have it. That's a really smart button to put it on, but I have my bird autofocus program to this top button up here. But yeah, if you just hold it and scroll the front dial back and forth, it'll go through, it'll go from birds to cats to planes, trains, automobiles,
Well, that's awesome. But yeah, all that to say that keep your backdrop in mind. If your autofocus or AI autofocus isn't quite nailing things like it normally does, I quickly will have no problem turning it off and using continuous on a small or cross or whatever area, depending on the animal and situation. Staying nimble and adaptable, I think, is the number one thing you can practice in wildlife photography specifically, because tiny little differences have huge impacts on your final images, all the way down to, understanding your camera's autofocus and what works sometimes and what doesn't other times.
Yes, being flexible. That's number one in photography. All right, one more. Are you using back button focus, and do you use manual ISO?
I'm not a big back button focus guy. I think I got so used to focusing with the half press that I'd say 80% of the time I use the half press shutter to focus. There are situations where I'll use back button. Sometimes this happens a lot in the summer when I photograph bears, or if I'm trying to get really low for any other animal. When you grab your camera and you bring it down below you and you're holding it, say, ground level, and I'm crouching, it can be a little awkward to kind of half press that button when it's below you. So when some of those more awkward situations, or if I'm taking a shot, say, vertically, I'll default to just holding the back button just because it feels more natural. And I know that I'm going to hold it in focus more reliably without accidentally taking 120 images of nothing. That's what happens when you have such a good burst rate.
I've been there. Yes.
Yeah. And manual ISO, so ISO, great question. This goes back to adaptability. And I think that ISO, when it comes to wildlife, you can encounter very fleeting moments. And for these fleeting moments, let's say I'm walking around in the woods looking for something, or I'm driving around in a national park looking for, I don't know, whatever it might be, wolves, coyotes, anything that's out. I actually will leave my ISO on auto with my exposure set, compensation set to somewhere that I feel comfortable with, just because it's one less thing to worry about. If I need to just fire away shots randomly at something that pops up and I just want to get a single image at least, right? So let's say you get out and there's a wolf running across the street. So you want to quickly burst. You don't want to have to think, oh, what's my ISO? So I preset my camera when I go out for wildlife to say, depending on what I think I might see, either 1,000 or 1,600, or if the light's plentiful, I'll do 2,000 as a default. Shutter speed, even more sometimes if it's really bright. And then I'll have my aperture all the way down and auto ISO. That way I can at the very least get an image off. Right. And then what I do is, if I'm having an encounter with an animal where I have more than just 10 seconds, I just quickly switch my ISO over to manual, and I pretty much most of the time have my ISO or my aperture as low as it goes. My shutter speed based on what the animal's doing. So if an animal's running, I'm going to bump it up. If an animal's kind of just hanging out, I might have it lower. So generally it's around somewhere between 500 is typically the lowest I try to go, and 2,000, 2,500 for birds, stuff like that. And then use my ISO as my exposure, so to say. And that works well for me. That's personally how I shoot. I have other friends like Tiffany that shoots exclusively on auto ISO and just adjusts her exposure compensation. I personally like controlling my ISO. And because I use that so much, and the default setting on manual is to have to click the ISO button and then switch the dial, I've also remapped my dials to be shutter speed and ISO rather than aperture and shutter speed. So I basically have to go through an extra button to change my aperture, but I can quickly, using both dials, change my ISO and my shutter speed.
All right. I'm moving forward now. We've got a couple more slides, I think.
Yeah. So
I like this one.
This image is taken in Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which is a wildlife refuge area near the airport. So again, urban wildlife, but it has some of the biggest mule deer and an amazing mule deer rut that's oftentimes visible right from the road. So if you're ever in Denver in December, late fall, early winter, definitely check out the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. They have bison there. Sometimes the bald eagles hang out there. Beautiful mule deer. And really what I loved about this image, other than the fact the light was just beautiful that morning, is just how sharp it was. This was another image I took before Tiffany and I went on this adventure. And if you zoom into it, it is tack sharp. You could see every little hair on this deer. And that's something that really stood out to me with this new Mark II. I was like, wow, like for a lens that's not considered a pro level lens, and that, how affordable this lens is, this is just an outstanding level of quality. The light was really nice, which definitely helped, as it does with any image that you try to get a lot of detail in. Light makes a huge difference. But every little hair detail on this beautiful mule deer buck was crisp and really popped and made me instantly, think, wow, this lens is capable of quite a bit, and just one of those images that simple, nothing crazy, but something I loved. And as you can see, as Mishalla zooms in here, I mean, every little hair is so tack sharp. And this was shot handheld, no tripods.
Yeah, you can see his little tufts even.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get the zoom thing. I need to have 6 more screens at my battle station here, and then I'll be able to really do this. Oh, amazing.
Nice, Tommy. Tommy just said he switched his AEL button to use subject detection. You'll love that.
Yeah, that's actually such a better. I have never thought to do that because I've always just had mine on the top, but
just because it's next to the lever, yeah.
Right, that's so much.
And I never use the button otherwise, so.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't think I've ever used that. I usually have it assigned to do something random, but I've always had it on the top of my camera. But now that you have said that, I'm like, oh, that is such a game changer because you're already kind of doing that motion. Yeah. Although I'm team front button too. So, all right. So let's see. What do we got? Ooh, this is beautiful.
Yeah, this is semi-urban photography. The city of Denver manages 2 bison herds that they reintroduced to local parks. And we went out to this area. This was with Tiffany. It was very windy, as you can tell by the snow blowing off this beautiful bison and the evening light just poking out through the clouds. Just wanted to showcase kind of one more time a bit of the low light performance, right? This was late in the day. This was like the last ray of light right as the sun was dipping behind the trees, and it was very windy. This image isn't quite as sharp as say the last one because it was so windy, and we were this is also fairly cropped. I think this bison was probably around 120 yards away or something like that. So it is a crop, but it came out really nicely. The light, thanks to that long reach of the lens, the 800 millimeter, you could get enough of that smooth foreground, blurring out the dark, moody trees in the background, and getting that kind of wind and snow whipping off this bison, with a lot of character to this bison too. I really like this bison in particular, just because of how different both of its horns are. You see that a lot, or not a lot, but you see it somewhat commonly, and those tend to be my favorite bison to photograph. I've seen bison with one horn up, another one kind of forward, and all sorts of different shapes, and quite entertaining. But all that to say that this lens performed well in lower light scenarios at the very end of the day, just like that first image with the elk that I shot through the trees. Did not disappoint.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Sync IS helped at all, especially with your lower light stuff, if you had to slow your shutter speed or things like that? Because that was like a game changer for me with this lens, was just having the full Sync IS added to it to make life so much easier versus relying on just one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yeah, like the fact that the lens and the camera are working together, which is what I'm used to shooting, right? When I think when I started shooting on the original one and it wasn't the case, I noticed that. But I've been shooting on, you know, the 40-150 f2.8 and the 300 f4 and the 150-400 so much that it's become second nature. And to just get that out of the box on a lens that had so much reach, I mean, it takes so much pressure off. It was windy, so I tried to bump up my shutter speed a bit more just to get it a little sharper here. Otherwise, if it was dead still, I probably would have dropped this down to below 300, you know, maybe 320 like I did with that first image. But I have no hesitation when it comes to image stabilization on any of the lenses. I use that lens and body combos that have Sync IS. I have shot wildlife images even in high res mode when they're very still, as slow as like 1/50th of a second, you know. And as long as your animal's dead still, even in high res, it'll piece that together and still produce a high res image. So overall, just such a pleasure having the Sync IS added to this lens and being able to use it in this scenario.
I was pretty impressed the first time I took a shot at like full zoom 400 millimeter. Same with also the 150-400. That blew my mind too. And I can't remember what I was doing. I was photographing a bird and it wasn't moving too quickly, so it was fine. But I wasn't paying any attention to my settings. I was just like, oh my gosh, a bird. I'm going to take a photo of this. And I was at like 1/40th of a second. That image was tack sharp, which should not even be possible at 400 millimeters at all. Like you should have some shake, like shutter shake, something, you know, from pressing your shutter. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, I was looking at my settings and I'm like, oh, these are not the right settings. And I go to make an adjustment and I'm like, wow, this image is great.
Yeah. I mean, there's times in the summer, you know, where we're out in Alaska spending time with bears, and later in the season when the sun finally starts setting at reasonable hours when we're still awake, you know, it's awesome being out with the bears just after sunset. I say ideally after sunset at low tide, so you have this big reflection on the low tide flats of what could be, if it's still, you know, a perfect mirror of the mountains or just blue or gray or purple, whatever, reflecting off the sky. And I've found myself dropping my shutter speed down to, God, 1/10 of a second. Like, because I'm like, why not? You know, I'd rather, the IS is so good. If my animal is still, and if I can get lucky enough with an animal that's still, I'd rather drop my ISO way back down and just have it wide open. You also get such nicer colors in my experience. You know, shooting at a higher shutter speed is nice and necessary sometimes, but oftentimes the images look much nicer if you can pull them off at a lower shutter speed.
Right, especially when you're getting into that sunset or like golden hour when the light is so warm and rich, and you can
the color just looks great.
Light. Yeah, huge fan. But I was super shocked that I was able to get my images at 1/50th of a second that sharp. It's amazing what Sync IS really does. It's a whole new world. When I came from a brand that didn't have that built into the bodies originally, so I was like, oh wow, this is fun. Somebody just asked if the optimal ISO is 200. Yes, the native ISO to all OM system cameras is 200. That's the best place you can be. It's the sweet spot. If you can stay there, which obviously you cannot always stay there, but yes, that's the optimal. All right, so we're totally going to change gears, like completely change gears now. There's no more wildlife. We're going to look at a beautiful mountain.
Yeah. So last but not least, I started my photography, passion for photography and photography career in landscape. And my favorite way to photograph landscapes is with telephoto lenses by far. This isn't necessarily a super telephoto example. You know, it's 246 equivalent. So decent telephoto, but it's not 800. But nonetheless, you know, I was out. This was on the same mission that we went on looking for those moose, actually.
Ah.
And I mean, these mountains are just stunning. Anyone that's been to Southwest Colorado knows just how beautiful those mountains are. I've seen a lot of beautiful mountains. I've been blessed, as a wildlife guide. I've been to some really beautiful places. Alaska, of course, the Canadian Rockies, Montana, Wyoming. I mean, living in the Grand Tetons, that's like living in a panorama. And Southwest Colorado does not disappoint. I mean, if you haven't been yet, I would definitely suggest going there. The landscapes are unique because not a lot of people photograph them there. And I mean, I just saw that. I couldn't not take a photo. It was just such a beautiful, otherworldly scene with these dark clouds and light rays shining down on this jagged peak. Perfect snow, dark trees in the foreground. I mean, I had a blast with this one, and again, just shows the versatility of this lens, how it's not just a wildlife lens. You can get great landscapes. Shot this one at f8, obviously tried to get a little bit more in focus, 1/1000th, because there was a little bit of wind, and I really wanted to freeze those clouds as much as possible and keep it as sharp as possible with all the snow flying through the air. And really happy with this. I'm actually getting this one printed for my house. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you were talking about the versatility. We actually sent this lens to one of our other ambassadors. I don't remember who. That's terrible. But to really focus on utilizing it for like macro photography as well, because it does focus relatively close to the front element. I mean, it's closer than most full frame systems will. And it's amazing the magnification you can get on it and get kind of like that pseudo macro. Like I used to use the original one. I used to use the first 100 to 400 for bees and things like that, to get those close-up shots of bees without being anywhere near them and trying not to get stung. So it's kind of interesting just how one lens that is kind of a super telephoto lens, so you kind of just have it stuck in your mindset of this is birds, this is wildlife, this is to bring stuff closer, but you can really still do a lot of things with it, which I think is just interesting.
I mean, 200, this is almost shot all the way wide, right? So this was for a telephoto, it's still telephoto, but it's pretty wide, right? 246. Just goes to show again just how the range of that. I mean, the difference between 200 and 800 is astounding. And when you zoom that lens in, I mean, it feels like you're looking through a telescope when it's all the way in. So yeah, overall, I think, have no complaints. I think this is a great lens for anyone looking to get into wildlife photography or any sort of telephoto photography, and provides a lot of great advantages to other lenses, even in terms of compactness to some of the more expensive lenses in the lineup. And the image quality is great. Definitely good enough to be printing in large format if you get your settings right and, pull the photo off as well as you can. But overall, just had so much fun shooting with this, and excited to hear if you guys have any questions about it.
Somebody's asking about your impatient dog. We heard him scooting around back there. He's ready. He's done with your live stream, he said.
Yeah, I think she's like, why are you locking me out?
I want to come in the room. Okay. So, okay, 200. Somebody was asking. Yes, Tommy, 248 millimeters is the full frame terms, right?
Yeah. So 123 on this image is the actual lens.
Yeah.
Right.
So the equivalent field of view. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Somebody asked, where did it go? Here we go. Is that the bison herd off I-70 just in the mountains?
It is actually. That is the one. It was on the left side of the road when you're driving west. That day they kind of bounce back and forth. They have 3 different pastures, and there's a hiking trail that goes along the edge of the pasture on the south side of the highway. So again, semi-urban, it's close to Genesee, and Not the most peaceful scenario because you have I-70 next to you, but nonetheless, was able to get a bison shot that I'm really happy with. That could easily have believed I was in Yellowstone taking that image, just shooting right off the side of the highway in Colorado.
That's funny. I've totally actually been to the hiking trail there randomly. We filmed a project, God, 6 years ago. And I was really sad because they took us there and they told us we would see bison. And then I did not see any bison that day. And I was really sad.
Yeah, they're probably one of the pastures hiding.
Yeah, we went up into their to the woods through the trees and stuff up along the side, and they were saying that there's a bison herd here. It's going to be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And we just filmed our video and didn't see any bison.
No,
that's okay. But I've totally been there. Anyway, I feel like there was one more question.
I'll answer Charlie real quick because he just asked if the 1:4 has a faster focus response than the original. I do think it does. The autofocus is better, faster overall, in my experience.
I don't know that it officially has any changes to the autofocus, but the Sync IS does help it capture images, and if it's all usability, right? So
yeah,
if it feels better and seems faster.
Yeah. I mean, the Sync IS in and of itself might help it, right? Just because the camera is just still, so that itself might be the difference, the difference maker. But overall, I thought that the autofocus was, to me, noticeably better than on the original, which I used for a couple months, not a huge amount of time, but I did have some experience on that original lens back in 2020, 21.
All right. Well, I think we are over the hour. We were worried we were going to end right on, and we're over the hour. But I will, let's see, let's remove these slides so we can talk. Thank you, Art, for sharing your images for one, and for sharing your evening with me. I know you've been out guiding like crazy lately and have had very little free time. So I appreciate you taking a little break and sharing these photos with everybody and your experience with the lens. And I want to just say thank you to everyone else who's joined us tonight as well. And of course, if you aren't following Art, I'm following Art. So you should be following Art on Instagram. It's on the bottom of the screen there. He posts a lot of amazing, beautiful photos and a lot of information about his trips and his tours, and actually a bunch of stories with our other ambassadors like Tiffany and Brooke when they're out being silly and photographing things together. So lots of great inspirational photography that you can check out there.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. But yeah, looking forward. If you guys have any other questions or anything regarding this lens or anything related to again, feel free to follow me and reach out to me via direct message on Instagram. I do my best to get back to as many people as possible. Maybe get to meet you soon, some of you soon, on some trip in some wild place.
I want to go on a trip in some wild place. We got to convince my boss that we need to do recon work,
Yeah.
We'll do a live stream from Alaska.
OM team retreat in Alaska.
Yes.
Co-sponsored by Think Wild Expeditions.
Yes, perfect. I love it. So everyone, you guys have a great evening. Thank you for being so friendly in the chat. We love having you guys. I do have a couple more live streams coming up next month. As always, subscribe to our page. All of our live streams get posted there. You can watch them after they end. They remain indefinitely on our page. And then you can also check out our events page this coming month. We have quite a few Zoom sessions coming up in the spring for all kinds of different topics. So definitely check out our events page, get signed up for some of those Zoom classes. We're going to be doing some really great deep dives. And again, thank you, Art, for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great night, everyone.
Happy Friday.